suggests erasure, and then that was somehow covered over, and then these photocopies were made, and other things were done with the card. I can't explain everything about, I don't know everything about what was done with those multiple copies of those particular fingerprint cards, but illustrating my point about the, and what I said, what I cited about the questions of manipulation of data. I think we know with this kind of material that a lot of strange things were done. While I have the thing here, I'm going to put up this piece that I find very suggestive of frame-up manipulations of fingerprints. In this case, the latent fingerprints supposedly left on the boxes, fingerprints, palm prints, a Warren Commission exhibit, which shows where various palm and fingerprints were located, and they're conveniently labeled: right index pointing southwest, and left palm print sounding. Everything is pointing in exactly the right direction for the limousine. And of course, these are supposedly Oswald fingerprints that are found in these pointing situations. The problem with that, of course, is that that's probably the fifth or sixth generation of rearrangements of boxes. We know, for example, that 90 seconds after the shooting, there was one major rearrangement of boxes. There's photographic evidence of that. So how does it happen that when the police finally get there and take their photograph and dust them for prints and so on, that they are fortunate enough that the boxes have been arranged at this time that everything is pointing in the right direction? Okay.
Right on.
Okay, then that's in relationship to my point, and I'm going to bring the light back up in a moment. In relation to the point about forgery of documents. The third thing that I say that we are, the third thing, again, this happens to be an area that I've given a lot of attention to. I say that we know, maybe I'm using a lot of we here where I should say I think I know, that the members of the Dallas Police Department had foreknowledge of the impending assassination in the role of Oswald as a designated patsy, referring to such items as the uncanny certainty of Captain Fritz that it was important to hold a man whose name, an employee, was missing, supposedly, according to Roy Truly, and it was so important to Fritz to hold that man that he immediately left the depository and went to the headquarters with the intention himself, personally, of going to Irving and holding that man, when in fact there were any number of men and women that were missing. One of my I'm interested in J.C. Cason, the president of the depository, who was not only missing, but he gave two alternative versions of where he was at the time of the shooting, where he was, what he was doing, and why he was out of the depository. But that and the movements of the Dallas police suggesting that they knew, well, I go into the details of it, they knew beforehand that the patsy was being set up. I say, fourthly, that we, again, I don't imagine I'll get too much disagreement. We know the FBI and Justice Department never came close to an adequate investigation of the crime. I do go in this section quite a bit into some of the research that I did, that Paul Hoke has done. Actually, Hoke's unpublished manuscript, the Oswald Papers, is a very valuable source of information about the relationship between Oswald and the FBI, and the whole question of what was Oswald's relationship. But even more interesting to me was the way the Dallas police and the Sheriff's Office and the Attorney General of Texas, that whole group of what I call Dallas Cowboys, apparently were the major propagators of a number of rumors, not only that Oswald was an agent, but that FBI agent Hosty had blurted out some incriminating information about the FBI's foreknowledge of Oswald as a potential assassin. The conditions of discovery of Hosty's vital data in Oswald's notebook, a piece of evidence that, like many others, appeared late, all suggesting a whole pattern of, and I'm not the first to suggest this, George O'Toole, in his assassination tape, certainly suggested a blackmailing operation that the Dallas police used to keep the FBI off their tails at a point that their tails started to be threatened in January and February of 1964. Okay, and to kind of the meat of what we know or don't know about who killed Kennedy, for number 5, I say we know, and I'm not so sure that we know, but we know who the assassins were. I don't quite agree with Crossfire's. I mean, I'm talking about Cutler's Crossfire. I don't quite agree with attaching names to those particular people firing from the firing points of Crossfire. I'm not that sure that we're ready to put names to those people. But I think that we are sure. I have to admit that I started my research with this theory, if you will, and it has only been reinforced over the years of study. Maybe because I started with that, I wind up with that. But I suggest that a real formula for the assassination might well be not the Mafia, the CIA, or both, but the Mafia, the CIA, and more. And the more, I think that John Davis admirably covered the elements of CIA and Mafia suspicion. I think, Harry, you and I exchanged a moment of pleasure that Davis seems to have come to a greater appreciation of the CIA component in this conspiracy than we might have thought on the basis of, say, Mafia Kingfish. And I really appreciated what Davis had to say on it. And I have some, I've expressed as I have some points. I don't believe, for example, that Oswald went 500 miles to the Town and Country Motel to take money from a Mafia associate in New Orleans, sort of like John said, well, maybe he didn't know where he was going when he went there, and I say to myself, oh yeah, he just went out for dinner, and went back to work the next day and didn't know that he was going into Mafia headquarters.
Could that have been, if he was used as a courier during '63, could that have been a courier?
Yeah, he's asking if that could have been part of the courier connection that Davis referred to, and I hadn't picked this up before, that Hauser supposedly got in the Brylab sting, he supposedly got the information from Marcello that Oswald was one of our couriers. I thought he was referring to the time before the Marines when he was a teenager and he was working for an import company. Apparently John thought that Hauser's information was that he might have been a courier as late as the summer of '63. I'm not sure.
Or even the scene involving Clay Shaw and Vernon Bundy out at that lake, sorry, was it Oswald and Shaw? Anyway, where Oswald's receiving money and so forth, it seemed to me that if he was acting as a courier for his uncle, that money might have been to do with gambling, not to do with receiving money for the impending assassination.
And it strikes me too that if you're going to make a false Oswald case with him spreading his anti-Castro provocations around, maybe there was a false Oswald in connection with Mafia. Maybe that was a person impersonating Oswald who went in and took the money in the Marcello a lot of possibilities of scenario there. But I just want to, again, thumbnail my argument here that I think certainly that these are well-credentialed elements of the assassination conspiracy, elements of the CIA. I appreciated John's suggestion of who some of these agents might have been, the Harvey connection, etc. But there are just too many other indications of more than that. There had to be people in the Dallas Police Department that were involved. There had to be Secret Service handlers that were involved. And as I said, and I was largely convinced by Scott Van Winsberg's research on Somoza, that we have to look at a broader anti-Castro scene in the world than just American CIA, Bay of Pigs oriented CIA, that there was in Latin America, there was a whole movement against Castro, of which Somoza, of course, was a major figure, and that his cooperation with the Bay of Pigs and the pre-assassination operations against Cuba might put him well in the camp of what Scott called him a dead suspect. That we have to look at that element of the more, just not just the American CIA, but its allies ideologically and organizationally elsewhere. And then I think in this more element, one needs to keep always in mind the possibility and probabilities, I see it, that important elements of the right wing, and particularly the Dallas right wing, and particularly the associates of General Walker may well have been involved. One of the things, the most surprising thing I ever found in the National Archives was that thing I found and published a few issues ago in a Nut Country so-called article, a report from the Louisiana State Police to the effect that General Walker had been in New Orleans, talk about New Orleans connections. He had been in New Orleans on the 19th and 20th, maybe the 18th of November, and had had very secret meetings operating out of the office of one George Singelman, and with the cooperation of Leander Perez, the racist political boss of New Orleans, who had actually been excommunicated from the Catholic Church because of his adamant segregation policy in the face of the church's requirement of school desegregation. He was dealing with some really big league types of racist individuals with very anti-Kennedy feelings, and I think those immediate pre-assassination activities of General Walker certainly require much consideration, plus the fact that he was in Shreveport, and there's probably a Shreveport connection that has yet to be really thoroughly studied. Okay, and then finally, in my survey of what I think we know, I made some comments at the end that on number 6, that it just kind of summarizes what I think we know, that the media have been totally remiss in terms of any kind of education of the public with reference to any accurate knowledge of the assassination. I did want to work in, but I think for anybody who hasn't ever looked at these, I think there's a kind of a smoking gun to the suggestion that there was an impersonation of Oswald in Mexico. I did write an article, The Trip That Never Was, which dealt with the documentary evidence of Oswald's presence or non-presence in Mexico in the summer of '63 when he did those provocative acts in the Cuban and Soviet embassies. Summers, for example, for all his suggestion that there was maybe some impersonation of Oswald in Mexico, not suggestion, but he documents a lot of impersonation. He says at least there was no doubt that the young man that registered in room 18 of the Hotel del Comercio in Mexico City was Lee Harvey Oswald. And here are those records. You may not even be able to see it. All right, room 18. Lee, Harvey Oswald. Whose handwriting is that? That is the supposed real Lee Harvey Oswald handwriting. Name inverted, which was on his entry visa in that form. So he was so stupid, I guess, that he copied the inverted form of his name on the registry for that hotel. But it's not Oswald's stupidity that I'm concerned about, but the observation that all the other names are in the same handwriting. They're in the handwriting of a hotel clerk.
Has any of the other names been checked out at all? Like any intrigue?
Oh, they've all been checked out in terms of trying to find somebody that had seen Oswald. I don't find any clear evidence from any of the people that any of them saw this person that was there in that hotel room.
This is Mexico.
This is Mexico City,
Number 24.
September 27th, 1963. Yeah.
Number 24 seems to be in the handwriting.
That is Lee. It's Harvey Oswald Lee. That's a guy by the name of Lee signing. There's a comrade.
H.O. Lee. H.O. Lee.
Well, H.O. Lee was the name on his supposed return ticket.
It's still
H.O. No, there was no H after we got it out.
How come is he the only name that's written like the...
Pardon me?
He's the only name that's written.
That's right. Okay, now, how come? The FBI finally, the Warren Commission finally asked the FBI that question. And they said, they did question the manager of the hotel, and his explanation was that the first night that a guest comes in, he or she signs his or her own name on the register, and for any subsequent nights that the person is there, the hotel clerk copies their names. The only problem with that, when you look at the tenure of the people in that hotel, there were about 8 other people who came in for the first time on that night. So on that account, their names should have been in their own handwriting rather than the handwriting of the clerk. And then you go to the subsequent nights, the 28th, 29th, and I'm sorry these are smudged, but I think you can see the relevant things about them perhaps. For the 28th, here's room 18, Lee Harvey. Now that's in a different writing. That's a hand printing, but again, it is unique. There are no other. All the others are cursive, and they're all apparently in the handwriting of someone else. So again, this renamed person it receives that unique treatment. The same is true for the next night. We still see Lee. I'm not sure if there's a comma in there now. Harvey. The same on the 29th. It's only on the 30th that Oswald's name ever gets written along with everybody else's name, or it's not Oswald, it's still, I think, Lee Harvey.
Jimmy, I noticed also, I noticed the name Fernando Valenzuela on the first night of dinner. I see that it shows up on each night, but it's not in the same writing as Lee Harvey. Room number 6, Fernando Valenzuela. He's there on the other sheet, which you also have, and of course,
An actor,
just to confirm what you're saying, just simply there is another name which appears in all 5 days in different handwriting.
Oh, yeah?
Or at least it's in different handwriting than Oswald, but the same handwriting as everyone else. Even though he's there every night that Oswald's there.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Vince for discussion. We are running late, and as I said, I did want to have him to have a chance to respond to this paper.
demonstrated here today for the whole weekend is there's such a thing as what we believe in is food for thought. I think this whole weekend has been a feast. I think every day in the formal conference meetings here and in the informal meetings together one-on-one with everybody, I think we've, to me, it's encouraging. I don't know. I think that I think we've demonstrated very well just the levels of agency complicity in the case, FBI, CIA, Secret Service, possible mafia involvement. The levels of that complicity has been debated here, but in the foreknowledge of agencies and people towards the crime and the cover-up. But so I think this weekend's been really good. I appreciate Professor Rose, and may I say from your demonstrations on Oswald and suspicion of the anomalies, I think you and Philip Melanson and maybe to lesser extent Paul Hope, I think you guys got that whole area very convincing as far as the anomalies there. So it also shows that nothing's black and white in this case too. And there's a tendency, I don't know, sometimes maybe if it's personal pride, your research, your hard work, where sometimes I'm guilty of it too, so I'm not passing judgment on anybody. I mean, we're all human. There will be a tendency to say, well, the mafia did it, hey, I don't believe in your theory. Or the CIA did it, hey, I don't believe what you're saying here. And I think it's, because nothing's black and white, I think it's a little bit of everything can be mixed into here. And nobody is really totally right and nobody's totally wrong. You know, so I think that's something that, I think that's something we're actually seeing here. And just the whole thing that Charles was talking about his novel, in the respect that I think that anger and emotion is good because that fuels the fire. Like I think that the average man in the street, at least I talked to for what it's worth, they think there's a conspiracy. Oh yeah, who's somebody in the grassy knoll and they name a certain agency, fill in the blank, and then it's like, well, what about that Pirates game? It's kind of like it's along that level, you know. It's like because a lot of people, they don't see the historical ramifications. They think like what. Well, quote Lipton here, a man in a building shot a man in a car, and that's it. And I think when you demonstrate the ramifications afterwards, beyond the personal feelings of what you thought about JFK and that's what's going to get the blood going. And I think that was a good point made. Whether the Oliver Stone movie might be some, you know, conceived red herring, if people want to take that viewpoint, I think it's still going to do a world of good, is getting out there just for nothing else, the general awareness, which is, you know, we bring this conference together for awareness of people in the know like us, but the man on the street who has X amount of interest in the case or knowledge or whatnot, that's going to bring the case up to a level. Whether Oliver Stone's going to, you know, go this way or that way is, you know, it's going to be that much better or whatever. And I just think in general, I think the level of general knowledge on the case has improved. It's saying, like, where do we go from here with the case, what we do. But it just seems like people, and here again, people on the street, that's the people we're trying to appeal to, is trying to get people to be aware of our research. I mean, the old saying, if a tree falls in the woods, nobody hears it, makes a sign. We can go to where we're blue in the face and check them documents out and look what we find, everybody, you know. But I mean, we're not coin collectors and stamp collectors here. I mean, just to satisfy our personal knowledge, we're here to, you know, and we know this too. I mean, I'm not saying anything new. We're here to present, you know, our case and try to, you know, do something with it. And I think the fact that the average people on the street that I encounter, that maybe they do show those emotions of kind of an indifference, the things that they tell me, it's almost like I want to say, how did you know that? Or where did you read that? Or, damn, man, it's like, you know about that document, you know about that film. It's almost surprising sometimes, and I think that's good. And I don't know where we were, because, well, I'm only 25, so it's not like I've been on this case forever. You know, I was too young to remember a lot of things, but it just seems to me that I can even recall before best evidence in high treason, and I was, you know, I was like in middle school when the hot select committee came out. People didn't know anything. I mean, they had no, it was just, I just didn't know how to explain it. It was like the best they know about was the anomalies and the single bullet theory. But now it's just like a whole realm of people naming names, whether it's speculation or not. So I think that in that respect, I think this conference and what we're doing is really good. And I think that reflects on what you're saying, where do we go from here? And the points that you brought in your paper that you were trying to explain, the things that we know. I think that that's good. I think we do know all the points that you stressed. So no matter what everybody's personal beliefs are, I think it's the fact that we've got that out. It's good. Thank you. Yeah.
speaking of the Stone film, I'd like to encourage everybody to put together a one-page flyer that could be made available in whatever local theater is showing the Stone film, so that all over the country, we've got people who come in to see the film can get some other information, at least maybe somebody to contact or some further information to follow up on.
Yeah.
As a retired police officer, and there are other police officers in the room.
Look at the address.
Quite a lot. But I just want you to know that we've all investigated a lot of crimes and interviewed a lot of people. And what you do, I have a lot of respect for what you're doing here, and the enthusiasm with which you're doing it. You're taking on a very large task, and I'm very encouraged by what I see. And if there's any way I can help personally, or if only to encourage you to keep going. I think you've come a long, long way, particularly since the time that Lipton came out with his first book, which might have had errors, but took you in a whole different direction. And I think you're well on the way. Thank you.
Well, as long as we started being subject to nice one, why don't we start to wind up in terms of the last, or almost the last announced issue. And what I want to do is absolutely at 1 o'clock out, wherever we are. And if you have to go before, I know we announced 12:30 closing, but it's hard to stop. But we will stop at 1, and if you can't stay till 1.
Is the cafeteria open over there?
No, I don't. Nothing on the college is open. They're processing these freshmen.
How adamant were they about the 12:30 checkout time? If we haven't loaded our bags in?
No problem.
Okay.
I hope. It's a problem for me, so don't worry. Okay. I did want to have a chance to give some of your views about the third decade, and I don't mean it's great or anything like that, but about its future. And I titled it this session kind of, well, I don't know, maybe the future of the third decade. Anybody for a fourth? Question really of whether or how, as we go into the fourth decade of assassination research, what kind of a publication are we looking for? What would we like to see in a fourth decade kind of publication? And maybe one of the big questions is who's going to do it if it's done. I'm asking George Michael to.
I asked to really be on this panel, but I really want to cede my time to the group. I don't want to suggest that we found it very helpful in other situations to go around the room twice, and that gives everyone a chance. And if the first time you say, I have a thing to say, you pass.
Well, why don't you come up and do that?
Okay.
That was my idea.
Because I'd really like to hear what other people have to say about this.
I didn't want to hear you again. I want to hear
Very true. So why don't we, as I said, I give up my time, and we move through, and if you decide the first time you don't want to say anything, that's all right, we'll come around again. What about the third decade? Do you have any suggestions for us?
all right, just, well, can you wait a minute, Sandy, and you guys?
Yeah.
Maybe even prior to that, because I know some people have to leave.
Yeah.
Maybe we ought to address this question of a future conference.
Why don't you
What's
take that?
next? Because, I mean, what's...
Take that.
Go ahead. You can do that, too.
Okay. What about a future conference? I think it's probably nearly unanimous. What? Would it be a kind of a floor vote for a future conference, say no less than a year from now? In Dallas.
I think having them in different regions would be an excellent
I think it's the reason
idea.
I
Of
do
course, we
too.
need sponsors in those areas. I don't know if the center in Dallas could or would.
I'm certain that in Washington you could at the very least get our support, and in Dallas you would get the JFK Center support. So that's true.
But then, of course, we're
to coordinate efforts with other groups and not make it just the third decade, but maybe take AARC in Washington.
Yeah, slash for third decade slash. Yeah.
Make it open to all researchers
Yeah.
and try to get everybody.
Co-sponsored by, say, the local group and open to all researchers. Great idea.
Even though we charged, I think getting Hosty to come would be interesting.
I think what we need to do is to get some input from you on the kinds of people we want to hear, it may very well be that we could have, if the charges were too great, maybe two or three.
That we haven't had so far, maybe even by
Possibly, yes.
There's nothing but contempt for this group and this kind of.
Maybe.
I dispute that. I know from when he called me up to look at my article, he did mention that he had recently resubscribed to the third decade and felt it had greatly improved. And it was particularly praiseworthy of Gary Rowell's article, a couple things Gary Rowell had written, so I'm not so sure that he had that much contempt for us.
I think Jerry really wants to hear from you. I think it's certain that you want to meet again and that you have suggestions like Dallas and Washington, possibly Dallas is at the top. You might want to send a postcard in.
And there's another big center of interest in California, of course.
And California.
New York and California run a neck-and-neck race always for a number of...
Yeah, I like New York, but I'm not necessarily... Pardon?
Boston would be too bad.
Boston wouldn't be too bad either. Yeah, as near to the Kennedy Library as possible. And all the stuff that's locked up there.
I think maybe the thing is not for us to just say we want to have it here, but somebody from one of these areas who would be interested in either hosting it or approaching somebody in their areas that could host it, maybe have I'd be willing to receive, maybe a clearinghouse for ideas.
How many people can go to California, want to go to California? How many people can go to Dallas?
Could I suggest something that again, and maybe in a response to that, a card, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 listing cities, for example. That would be a very simple device. They could be collated, and we'd find out from you. And for the people who have already left, make a reminder we need a card from them, you need a card from them, so that we can find out. Yes, sir.
How many people subscribe to Third Decade?
About 307.
And how many, like geographically, how many in Europe, for instance?
Europe, there are 8 or 10, I guess, scattered around. Scandinavia, mostly Germany, Spain, Greece.
How many in Canada?
Canada, probably 12.
Yes, sir.
I know that Paul Oak says that was a conspiracy. He's only got about 30 subscribers now, but he says that he assumes that all subscribers also subscribe to the third decade.
Right.
Are you suggesting there ought to be kind of reciprocity?
Well,
I don't think we
suggesting
can
that-
presume that people who subscribe to one necessarily subscribe to others, and not in terms of factional differences, but they just haven't been plugged in.
No, what I'm saying is that this highly knowledgeable man is paying the highest compliment to the third decade. And it's advising his readership that if they do not subscribe, they should
Okay.
be well
Yeah,
advised.
constantly. Every issue it seems to mention.
That's excellent. Yes. Well, okay, now the second issue is, and I think Jerry means it, what about the third decade for a fourth decade?
I think it would be renamed to the fourth decade.
Well, that could be that the third decade is such a good title and has so given its consciousness back to us, that it might be a good title to retain.
It would have to change to 4.
But it should.
Well, can I make a suggestion that since we won't reach the fourth decade for about
We can hold off.
2 more years, we may not need a fourth decade if we all get our tests and the case solved.
We need that kind of
You need to be
optimism.
that enthusiastic right now. When you
Yeah.
go home, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Let's sleep.
My tendency would be to suggest to you that we buy Jerry some mega vitamins, offer him maximum support, and unanimously support him for the editor of the fourth decade, if on the possibility we need it. So I really would mourn the loss of Jerry Rose as the editor of the third decade. Pardon?
There are other cases we could go on to.
And that's a possibility too.
I
Thank
think it's
you.
getting hot right now.
Yeah, what about the cover-up in the Taylor case?
In the political process of the United States, most groups against something done in the country, whatever issue it may be, civil rights, housing, against the war, for the war, whatever, the only way you get to Washington, whatever you believe in the issue or don't believe in the issue, and the bottom line is an obvious. I I mean, that's how things happen in this country, even though it takes a long time to change. Is there any faction from your own experience in this country, or can we go towards a future aspect, take this energy and drive, and to make the political process work, to reopen, to reinvestigate, take all the hard work that these people have presented to us today, and make our organization more of a combination of a lobbyist aspect, because if we don't do this, okay, and it took the black people 100 years to realize this, without lobbyists in Washington, you're not going to get things done. It'll just stay as a dream.
Well, that's what they had to give the health select committee, but many people were disappointed in that and figured, why do the same thing again if you're going to have the same result?
Because the only way you're going to get things to change is you still have to. It did reopen a lot of things that gave new information to the people, white folks today, that wasn't there before this.
But some people feel that the process of doing it was perverted and it became another cover-up.
And then maybe both are true.
Do it again.
Yeah.
Both are true.
There's a whole generation of burned out people who burned out on the enthusiasm of the Assassination Information Bureau. That they lobbied, they got the investigation, they got their investigation, and that investigation killed them.
It's also true.
They got their wish. It's one of those things like, better not push because it might come true. Okay, you know, if we push for an investigation, we might get still a third vote.
But that is why, then let me ask you this question, okay? It's an important question. Why do all this work if you're not going to try to bring the justice in the open? And the only way justice can come in the open, our own system has to be open enough in order to make it just. Otherwise, it's indictments.
I think that's a good suggestion. You have to bring an indictment, and probably you have to bring an indictment
by somebody somewhere.
Yeah, where people can be accused.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Make it up.
Yeah.
We need another garrison.
Yeah, what you have are a number of possibilities: obstruction of justice indictments, a conspiracy to commit felony murder, and one that, by the way, would have held a man's civil rights were abrogated on November 22nd, 1963. That law was in force. Got it? John F. Kennedy's civil rights were abrogated, and you can bring a federal case against the conspirators. The problem is you need indictments possibly in Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Memphis, and elsewhere. Now, unless Jerry's got another idea, at least hold that as a possibility, and that we ought to develop, and as Harry has said, airtight arguments, structures of evidence that cannot be penetrated by counter-arguments, and then look for indictments, if possible, in a variety of areas. There are other alternatives.
Come soon. Indictments must come soon, because pretty soon there won't be anybody to indict.
Yeah, I have it on good authority on off-the-record discussion with an FBI man when I said, and this was before Trafficante died, I said he's a key to the people who ultimately ran the operation that used the Trafficante killers. And he said, so? And I said, and if he has a heart condition, goes in the hospital, he's going to die. And he said, so? And I said, Marcello's losing his mind. He said, let the one son of a bitch die and let the other guy lose his mind. And then he said, forget it. The man's dead in his grave. Forget it. Now, we can't let that kind of cynical suggestion dominate the operations anymore. So I'm suggesting that.
What we need to do is to try to push forward with indictments when we don't have the right evidence. I mean, I understand that we want to push forward, but we don't want to do a garrison. And when it comes right down to it, not have the evidence that you need. I mean, that will set us back.
That's good. That's good. I really don't have an answer to that, because in evidence areas where there are too many variables, you got a problem. Yes, sir.
Two things. One is that there's a model for the indictment approach. It's happening this year called the Nuremberg campaign, which is focusing on nuclear weapons. And the preparations for that, my office and guidelines. Second thing, we can lobby for specific things, like lobbying for releasing the House Assassination Committee documents, broadening the Freedom of Information Act, things that we can specifically target instead of saying let's get a committee and solve the case. That's a grandiose type of lobbying. Let's focus on some specific things that we can nail, like the Freedom of Information Act suits have brought things out. Let's broaden that so that we can get more out. Instead of having to go
two good suggestions. But here he said that it may be a kind of dramatic version of it, but there is dis-ease among the House Select Committee on Assassination members. The living members from Connecticut, we had two. One was on on the King side, is dead. But Senator Dodd has high visibility. He's close to the Kennedys, and he, at the very least, is indicating dis-ease about the case. I lobbied him extensively. I gave him evidence. This sounds immodest, but that appendix in which he argues for several guns is based upon the work that I finally literally forced him to accept, so that he would take it back into the House Select Committee on Assassination. Unfortunately, much, much too late. So starting over, you might look at the people, the survivors of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. If they're in neighboring states, that's good, or better. If they're in your states, that's best. And begin thinking about re-entering a relationship with them.
Is Downing infected at all?
I don't know.
Still alive. I heard Lewis Stokes.
Yes.
He's interested.
Downing was rated 100% by a right-wing conservative think tank. He co-opted that investigation, planted Spector's close friend, Richard Sprague, as the chief counsel of the committee, and Downing was there basically to cut the whole thing off the pass to start, but everybody had moved over their eyes.
He's also the person that made Robert Morrow's manuscript available, and seemed to place a lot of importance on Morrow's betrayal theories.
Yeah, which is both good.
Yeah, and also Massagoka.
Is there anything we can do to unlock the House Select Committee files that were locked?
That's another.
Stokes, I think, yeah.
What do you say?
He's doing something about it. So supposedly, I can't remember what the report was, but something, if Lewis Stokes will get his bill, those will come out instead of waiting 50 years. It was on TV, it was a real small report. But that's what's vivid in my mind, that's why I mentioned Lewis Stokes. There's something about it.
Well, what's happened to Access, Mark Allen's operation? That was I didn't get to talk to Mark about that.
All right, and then that's something I'll tell you, at our last meeting, the board of directors, we voted, I think it's unanimously, to send out a newsletter regularly out of Washington, and I volunteered to edit it so that at some future date it could be kind of predecessor to your journal. So if you're on the mailing list, we'll get in touch with you to see whether you want to put the newsletter. And I think we'll probably send it to you whether you ask for it or not, because we'd like to get in touch. So that's the kind of thing we'll be doing out of Washington, telling you about Access and Jim Lazar's Freedom of Information Act, the kinds of new materials we have coming in, etc.
One idea, I've discussed this with Jerry Rose briefly in the past. I'm not sure if this is feasible. I'm not sure if I'd be able to help make this happen or what extent I could work on it. But there have been so many really great quality articles in the third decade over the last few years. If at the end of the third decade or whatever, if we could compile an anthology, and if that could be published as, say, a hardcover book. And I'm thinking of the one that Tim Quick wrote on the motorcade stories that were never, the motorcade route stories that were never true, and some of Jerry Rose's work on forgeries. This hasn't shown up in any of the hardcover books or paperbacks available on the Assassination.
I'm going to be using quite a bit of the material. I'm asking how much files.
Okay.
There are also articles that have been too big to appear in the third decade. And Steve Barber and I had our little back and forth going on, which would be, waste of space. And if anybody's interested, they might want to get in touch with me or Steve Barber and get stuff like that.
Okay, we're talking about then a third decade anthology and monographs possibly developed independently over the third decade. Yes, sir.
I was about to say, real quick, I introduced to Jerry last night. I'd say just the whole idea, like the ARC sells their videotapes, and, maybe it's a break even, I don't know. Maybe it's with the conference video and anything else like that. Use it as a fundraiser type of thing. The people aren't here at the conference and so forth. They made it all well in that respect. And, you have more conferences than that, but have the incentives maybe as a fundraiser type of deal.
Well, I can share with you, the funding in the third decade now is pretty good.
So you're going to lower the price?
Take a vacation.
My volume has gone up because of this damn high treason, primarily. Yeah, I'm certainly be interested in fundraising, but third decade is not a profit-making organization. It's trying to graduate. Penn Jones, I don't know whether you realize this, I grew out of Penn Jones continuing inquiry. I killed Penn Jones. I did. No, my articles killed Penn Jones. I had 6 articles in the last year of the continuing inquiry, and then Penn went out of existence on it. And I tried to continue.
George, success.
I tried to continue the continuing inquiry, and what was I saying? Oh, yeah. Penn said, and he said repeatedly, if you can't afford to lose $200 a month, you shouldn't be in this business. And I thought for about 5 years that, how did he know I'm going to lose $200 every month? But that's not the situation. I mean,
Did you spend it for like 40 pages initially?
Yeah, sure.
That's something that Jerry might think about, by the way.
I don't think we can read that once every month.
Excellent stuff in continuing inquiry, which would be non-third decade material that could be recovered from those back files. And if Ken Jones would be willing, those are excellent pieces to anthologize. Yes, there's one, two,
and I have an index, it's not widely known, but I have an index of Penn Jones, all Penn Jones stuff.
Good. Pardon me, Stan's got a...
I gotta get out of here. I just want to thank everybody for being so receptive, friendly, and informative. It's very interesting, and I'm very, very stimulated for coming down here, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you guys again.
One?
Yeah, I'd just like to see more of a wanted section where you could write in and say if anybody has the information on A number 1 or A number 2 or something, and you could get this from all different parts of the country, and where you might be looking for 6 months that somebody might have readily in their house.
No, I want to suggest that that's important. Now, reinventing the wheel is not what we want it to be about, because you can be putting in 6 months or a year of hard work and then find out it was in an unavailable but possibly scarce source, and that all your work has all been duplicated 5 years before you begin your work. So it would be good in terms of inquiry, and that means we have to be a little more open, right? That's why I talked about security stripping, and I said, you go do it. That would be great, and I'll just stop doing that. And if we have an open inquiries section that way, we'll save time and cooperate and interact. Right, number 2.
It might be a good idea to set up sort of a separate thing connected with the third decade. Someone mentioned longer articles that are too long to appear in the third decade. Maybe have a third decade monograph series.
Excellent idea.
That would be, you'd have a list of monographs that would be available. You'd have a list of, if you could arrange with Penn Jones for permission, a list of the articles in the continuing inquiry, and people could order specific articles, and they could just be duplicated. And that would provide a little more funding for the third decade and have kind of an ongoing source of material that could be reproduced whenever people requested it.
Great.
Okay, well, remember, or if you don't know, the third decade has been done within the parameters of a one-person operation. And a lot of things that could be done and should be done are just not done. It's not even one full-time person. It's one person that does this on the side. Some of those are like Jim Lazard running AARC as a half-time lawyer. Whatever we're going to do, whatever I do, I have to have help. And maybe I should be able to organize help better, but that's not my greatest skill, to organize other people's work.
Well, I would volunteer. I've got complete back issues of the continuing inquiry. If you want to publish a list or make available a list to subscribers of articles in the continuing inquiry, people can just, order them from me. Whatever. This is a reasonable price. I think it's 6 cents a page for copies. And I would ship them out just for copies and postage costs.
I need a quick suggestion that Mr. Rush. We have, a lot of us have resistance to computer technology, and Jerry's still in the dark ages in a certain respect. And if he had a little help dealing with these things computerized, in other words, if we have articles to publish it, if he can have it on disk, if it's convertible, and he can set up with the computer department here. You don't have to type all this. You don't have to subject some poor victim like your wife or your daughter typing all this.
Right, but the whole point is that it's just going to drive you into the ground. All of us writers know what it does to you to have to do this. And if you're typing that whole thing every month, God bless you, but there's an easier way. The writers have to put it on disk. It should be, let's settle on some kind of a
We have
one or two programs.
Universal ASCII format.
Yeah, and then you take it to your computer department, get your printout, and just photocopy it. But you shouldn't have to do this, and you should be resistant to progress, sir.
I think everybody who's submitting an article should be able to find someone to type notes with it.
That's right. The Kingo section is
It may not be necessary.
Well, I know, Harry, I don't want another continuing inquiry where, you send Penn an article in whatever state of disarray, the manuscripts come in, and he photocopies it, and that's, it's just like...
No, this is computer.
CRAP.
He doesn't understand basically what a computer submission, it will be a nice text file like we've got here. It won't be any different. It won't be any different. Just use the default settings for any standard word processing program. It's going to come out 50 lines to the page. It'll have those margins. It'll be centered, and it's no problem for anybody. Now, some people may not be able to have access to computer service without the middle of nowhere, and so you'll have to type it. See, but I think most of the people that are submitting to you should be able to submit it on a disk along with a hard copy printout, and you should be able to simply feed it into a machine that gives you.
Yeah, and as I'm saying, I almost never print an article as it comes to me. Harry always goes back for revision.
And send it back for
whatever,
revision.
If that's within the program.
Sure, that can be yes.
More comments?
There was a mention about possibility of other cases, but are we committed to continuing to focus of the third decade is the JFK?
Until some future date? Yeah, that's why the other options that involve the possible development of places where people are interested in the relationship between the cases, or the Robert Kennedy case, or the attempt on Wallace or Reagan, those options should be available in some other form. But you can still think about it in 1993, optimistically, if it's no longer needed, and less optimistically, if it's still needed, about making a switch. I'd suggest strongly not switching in 93.
Well, that's what was nice about this weekend, is that we didn't get off onto tangents with that, which is so easy to do, because we know that there are threads throughout the last, 47 years, and I like it, the focus that way.
Good.
Well, I'll stay focused that way as long as I'm the editor on it, because that's my interest. That's what I know that's about to edit, I guess.
I haven't read some articles on like Robert Kennedy's assassination.
As there's a relationship between the two, But, before we cut out,
I was just going to say, in terms of what's been published in the third decade on the Bob Kennedy assassination, somebody mentioned a book review, and of course that's referring to Robert Morrow's The Senator Must Die, but even that review focused exclusively on the aspects of the book which dealt with JFK.
That's it.
What's the best way of getting a list of the documents that are still classified? Is there any way?
Yeah, I will ask Jim Lazar if we can develop it.
But which classifications?
Which classifications?
I'll break it down.
You're talking about the House Select Committee on Assassination.
In the back of Farewell America,
Yeah.
there's a long list which I went through and put in chronological order, date by date, and I also broke it down into Secret Service, CIA, FBI, and miscellaneous. But that's from 1968.
That's right.
Now, a lot of those have been declassified. For instance, CD 1080 that I talked about, Harold Isaacs, was declassified. And it's listed there as being a classified document. I'd like to get a fairly recent list to find out which ones are no longer classified.
Ray's got some.
I have a list of it last year.
You do?
Yeah, I can send it to you. I have your address.
And you're reading?
Well, could that be, Lynn, would you start a circulated one? Kind of bounce off? You make a copy and send it to us.
I could suggest that for the AARC, for immediate financial crunch, that now that we have a list of the solid core of supporters here, that you send out a request that each person put in $30.
That's exactly
whatever to get the rent.
If you don't mind my saying, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Would Ray's list be suitable for publication in the third decade?
It's what?
It's only a page and a half, maybe.
It's what?
I was planning on sending it, but I never got around to
What?
If you could publish that.
It's 1,500 a month, right? Another 1,500 over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's accurate. More commentary. Before we all leave, I'm going to really like standing ovation for Jerry Ross.
You were going to stand up anyway, so...
One other thing. Could John F. Kennedy have the last word? Fred DeVinny gave me a quote, and I think, though it has strains of Cold Warrior in it, it is appropriate to John F. Kennedy, and there are some phrases I think we might want to hear again. So let's, a kind of last statement. Now the trumpets summon us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Thank you for all being here.
If anyone wants a high season, the coffee in my car
Yes.